This is Taylor Gray, voice of Ezra Bridger on Star Wars Rebels, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
I must say your request was unexpected, seeing as how our planets were on opposite sides during the Clone War.
I believe we are now united in wanting the same things.
She was working on something involving M count? I don't know what that means, but they were taking blood samples from everyone, even me.
You're different than you were on Ryloth. So, what changed? Loyalty meant something to me. I'm sorry about your men. Thanks.
This is Ashley Eckstein, Ahsoka Tano from Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z.
Hello, friends, and yes, it is time, because it is that time. If you look on your calendar, if you look on your watch, if you look on your podcast feed, you know it's time to talk about Star Wars The Bad Batch on Coffee with Kenobi. So I've got two of my fellow clones. Actually, one might be accused of being a clone of me, but the other one not as much, although I would happily claim him. So let's bring them both in. First, joining me on every episode where we look at Star Wars The Bad Batch, Mr. Mason Zehr. Mason, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to see who our clone friend is.
I am too. All right, so the clone that you've been wondering about is the co-host of the Colby Cast, Mr. Colby Mead. Colby, welcome back to Coffee with Kenobi.
Hello, my guys. I am so excited to be here with the both of you to talk about the Bad Batch. And I think it's quite appropriate that we're talking about clones, because if I'm a clone, I am definitely a defective clone. So I'm going to fit right in on this conversation.
I would never say that about you. But the extra talent is certainly there, and we're going to need it to talk about these two episodes. They are incredible. Because we're going to talk about Infiltration first and then Extraction. First, we're going to do them separately, like we try to do when there are a number of them, because Disney has blessed us with two shows at one day. So that's great. Mason, let's start with you. What is your one word to describe Infiltration and overall thoughts on the episode?
My one word for Infiltration is sneaky, because you just have that feeling in like that ninja kind of movie, kind of like a James Bond movie where they're sneaking around and trying to find this one target.
Excellent. Now, Mason has not seen the James Bond movie yet, but that is a pretty apt comparison of what several of those films are like. Colby, what about you? What is your one word and overall thoughts on Infiltration?
So I went with harrowing, because I just was stressed out from the beginning to the end of this episode, and it was built to do that to the viewer, right? And Mason, I love the fact that you're talking about ninjas and looking after this one, or trying to find this one character, because that's exactly what they were dealing with, right? This one guy is just infiltrating in the shadows, and he's so capable, and that is where my stress came from. Like, these guys don't even know he's there. I just thought it was tense, made my heart race. I thought that the music, I'll always talk about the music, I'm a broken record, but the music really matched the tone perfectly. And I think it really, it just heightened the experience for me. It just built and built and built, and the danger seemed to increase, with each scene. Overall, I just thought it was stellar storytelling.
I think we're all going to be in the Infiltration fan club. My word for this episode is spectacular. It's a spectacular, well-paced, suspenseful, character-driven piece that is full of action that isn't superfluous, and I'm going to talk about that a lot over these two episodes. Being on the edge of your seat, bringing very much the light. Again, I say this every week. I say it in the live shows too. The fact that in the Bad Batch we're able to advance the plot of these characters, fit it beautifully into the overall Star Wars story, and make these character pieces too, is not easy. That's a very high degree of difficulty when telling a story, and it's spectacular, definitely in Infiltration. So let's talk about this. I think there are a number of ways to go. The opening sequence is a nice little reminder that there's a bigger galaxy out here. There's a lot of stuff. Whenever we see Rex And yes, Captain Rex is in this episode. He's always involving helping senators. He's with Senator, is it Singh? Yes. And there's interesting things going on. A lot of covert stuff. Mason, you mentioned sneaky. There's a lot of espionage in this. What do you think are some takeaways from this opening sequence with Rex and the senators? And Colby, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Right off the bat, the threat is established, right? Because, I tried to find the name of this character. I probably should have just looked at the credits, but that may not have helped either. But that first, they called him a shadow, right? The clones, once they came across paths with him, they called him a shadow. So I didn't mind.
That's the only name we have.
Okay. I just called him the Shadow Soldier, so I'm going to stick with it. But right off the bat, I think that's the very first perspective we get is through his view scope, right? And he's looking, we don't even know who's looking through that. And then it shifts to see him. I just loved his design, and he's moving around, Mason, again, like you said, like a ninja. He's going places undetected, and immediately you feel the threat. You see Rex. My heart jumps every time I see Rex. Anytime I get to see him, it's just a thrill. And we start seeing familiar characters like Senator Singh, and then they go to see Senator Chuchi. And again, Dan, like you said, it just reminds us that these characters have this rich history, and we're tying it all together. But yeah, that tone is set right off the bat with that shadow soldier just lurking in the shadows and moving around, and you feel the threat from the beginning. So I checked my watch to see what my heart rate was right off the bat, and it was slightly elevated very early.
Yes, I understand that. Mason, what do you want to say about this opening sequence?
I would say just like him, like that clone that's looking through that scope, you don't know who that is. It could be some clone we know a lot about. It could be some we've never heard about. Or maybe it's just one we've heard a little bit about. But it's very interesting to think it could be anyone behind that mask.
And like in season 2, whenever these shadow clones show up, we're not sure, like you said, Mason, is it a clone that has just changed their allegiance and they're very now fiercely loyal to the Empire? Even in a very extreme way. I think these shadow troopers are very extreme. They're beyond zealots. They're very much brainwashed, I think it's fair to say. So there's some great mystery there. The thing that stands out to me about this is that when Senator Singh is talking, because Rex says, I didn't expect to see you two together. And Senator Singh was a separatist. So obviously in the Clone Wars, the separatists were against the Republic. We know how that turned out. But Senator Singh says something fascinating. He says, the separatist movement may be gone, but our desire for true independence has not faded. And I absolutely loved that, because this is a reminder that when you're on the side of wrong, sometimes right and wrong is depending on who's telling the story of history. Sometimes. In this instance, this is how Senator Singh is looking at it. And it's amazing, because for him, it wasn't about hurting Jedi per se, or striking major attacks against the Republic. For him, it was just about, we want to be independent. We want to stand on our own. We want to be separate. Not because we're evil, sinister separatists, with the mustache twitching like Count Dooku, but because we just want to have our own independence and freedom. That's not any different than the 13 colonies trying to break away from Great Britain. And I think there's some interesting applications there, because it's a nice, subtle reminder. They don't spend a lot of time hovering on it, but it's a very nice reminder that, there's more to it than just black and white. There's a lot of gray in real life and in a fictional story about droids and spaceships and laser swords. And I really like that immediate, quick, real world application to show that this is much more cerebral. Fascinating.
Well, and it's very, very consistent with Star Wars, right? Because perspective, aka points of view, has been around very famously since the beginning. And it was very much a part of the prequel trilogy and the whole story of the fall of the Republic. And the good guys were the bad guys. And the bad guys, maybe they weren't all bad after all. And we got to explore that a little bit in the Clone Wars too, thinking of a few specific episodes there. And anytime they get to play with that little theme is just so much fun.
I agree. Mason, anything you want to add to that, or should we move on to the next topic?
No, completely agree.
All right, right on. Well, I think another key point of emphasis in Infiltration, obviously there's a lot of espionage going on. We can talk more about that shadow clone. I think when the shadow clone is interrogated, there's a lot of tension here. The shadow assassin, I think he's called a clone assassin in the captions, but this assassin doesn't talk at all. But there are other clones in this who do talk. We get to see the return of Hauser. Hauser, you may remember, was from the season 2 arc where we get to meet a young Harrison Dula, and it all takes place on Ryloth. And so I really liked Hauser in season 2. I thought he was very compelling. I thought he was very unique. He was very much against the status quo. He was not afraid of standing up to the Empire, much to his detriment. But now we know that he's alive, that he's safe. But he's got a major axe to grind with Crosshair. He doesn't like Crosshair at first. Mason, what did you notice about the conversation between Hauser and Crosshair?
I noticed that like as soon as they get close to each other, they both have that like little look on their face, like, oh. And then Crosshair, not as much, because he thinks he would trust him now, because he would think that he would know what has happened, but he doesn't, so he has to like grow onto him, basically.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. Colby, what about you?
You know, I had forgotten that Crosshair had as much to do with that episode as he did until Hauser brought it up, which again is just very good storytelling because they're reminding you of things as they're going. You don't necessarily need to have rewatched this whole thing, but through some dialogue, you're reminded, oh, wait a minute. I think that was the episode where Crosshair got his whole scar on the side, right? Because there was that big escape through the ion engine, right? And Hauser was right there. And then that very dramatic ending where Hauser's having a standoff and Crosshair's got him in the crosshairs. And just that one line of dialogue from Hauser reminded me of that. And because my first reaction was, oh man, Hauser, why do you have a bone to pick with Crosshair? Everybody has a bone to pick with Crosshair. But when he continued to speak, it reminded me of that. It's just such rich storytelling to bring these characters back in such a way. And that's one of my favorite parts about this episode, was seeing all these random clones. And it makes total sense because of what we know Rex is doing. So I loved the dynamic between these two characters, especially where they go through the episode and into the next one and where they end off. And you don't get that payoff that we got unless we have that little sandpaper moment at their first meeting.
Sandpaper moment is a great way to express that. I think if there was ever any doubt that Crosshair and Hunter have forgiven one another, that they're at peace with one another, you see it here when they're walking through the jungle area. And Hauser starts to get very chesty with Crosshair. And to Crosshair's credit, he could very much kind of puff up his chest and get into sort of this like, you know, let's fight. You know, let's see who the top dog is. Crosshair doesn't necessarily back down, but he's not aggressive. He's still consistent with who he is. And then Hunter sticks up for him very declaratively, to the point where I believe that Hunter would physically stand up for Crosshair. Doesn't come to that. Hunter's too smart for that, but he's ready for that. That's a huge thing to show that these two are like this. And Crosshair completely, he's not subservient to Hunter. He's not subservient to anyone, but there's so much respect there. And I love that growth. And now I'm glad we're not just going to grind through the same old trite arguments and conversations, because that wouldn't be growth. That would not be character development. And I think it's so important to helping us as an audience know that we too can trust Crosshair.
I agree with you, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was one of the things that I was sort of hoping they weren't going to spend too much time on in this season, was the reintegration or the healing process. Like, these guys are brothers, right? They established it right off the bat very early on when we met them in the Clone Wars. They're brothers. So as much as Hunter had a good reason to have issues with Crosshair, that's earned. But Crosshair was also very vulnerable and he was very honest with Hunter too. And after that, you know, in Crosshair's way, he asked for his forgiveness, and Hunter forgave him. So it's nice to see it's already paying off. There's one moment that I'd love to bring up if we could before we move on past it. But
Please.
when first of all, a data puck showed up. Did you guys catch that? Where they pulled it. So I love that reference to the Mandalorian. Of course, it's got a little hockey term in it too. So
I was going to say,
makes me nerd out a little. And then Wrecker, of course, he always gets me with his one-liners when they first arrive on the planet, and everybody's just sort of cold to their arrival. Wrecker says something to the effect of, "Not happy to see us, huh? Just like old times."
I love that too. Wrecker consistently gives just one nice little one-liner, but it's great because it's such a juxtaposition of the size and of him. He's such a big, hulking, intimidating presence, and yet he's got a heart of gold, doesn't he? Speaking of hearts of gold,
teddy bear.
Yeah, Mason, anything on that?
Nope.
Okay. I do want you to talk about this, Mason. Talk about Omega and Crosshair's relationship in this episode. There's one quick scene, real quick. There's no dialogue between the two of them, so we don't have to talk about that necessarily right now. But what do we see between these two in this episode?
Just like every episode, you see them starting to get more familiar with each other and starting to like each other more. And really, in the ship, what you see is Omega looking at Crosshair trying to do what he does, like chewing on the toothpick and all that.
Yeah, Jennifer Corbett, the head writer of this, she commented on there about the toothpick, but she put a gif of the Grinch with his toothpick. But no, she is very much emulating Crosshair because even though she's technically older, he's her big brother. And I just love seeing that. And Hunter looks back, he sees it. He doesn't sigh. He doesn't feel exasperated. He just carries on. The fact that Hunter is not worried about the influence that Omega has on Crosshair and vice versa, again, everyone should be at peace with that because the story is telling you this is okay. And how could you not be charmed by that little toothpick scene? I mean, I'll just give a spoiler, everybody, for next week's live show. That's going to be my top 5.
Mason, do you remember, and I hope you do because I can't remember all the details, but do you remember in season 1 that she did the same thing? And I think it was with Crosshair too. And it was in one of the early episodes and they were sitting like, I don't know if it was, you remember they had like their own room, or maybe it was the cafeteria. And like she's sitting, I don't know if she's copying Crosshair or Hunter, but she's copying somebody, like literally sitting the way that whoever it was she was copying was sitting, right? You remember that?
I think
was
so.
It Hunter? Because I had a flashback to that moment when I saw the toothpick, because this is what she's done, right? Her whole existence. We sort of talked about this on the last episode of the Colby Cast when we talked about episodes 4 and 5. One of those episodes, there's a line, "Watch and learn," where she says to Crosshair, right? "Watch and learn." That is, to me, that is Omega's thesis statement. Like that is her. She watches and she learns, and then she displays that skill, whatever it is that she acquires. And this is just such a fun way to see it again.
You know, when you said that, it reminded me of some of my favorite sequences in film. I think the most prevalent one to me is the sequence in Jaws, where Chief Brody's sitting at the dinner table with his sons, and he goes like this, and then the little boy goes like this, and they emulate each other. Just a quick scene in a movie about a shark that's terrorizing Amity Island. But it's not just a scene. That's a scene that shows this guy isn't a sheriff. This guy's a man. This guy's a father. This guy is a person that these kids connect with. And you see that here. Again, such a powerful way to show a strong relationship without using any dialogue. That's great storytelling. The other stuff in here I want to talk about, honestly, just the actual, I mentioned this at the top of the show, but the action in this I really appreciated because it wasn't just frivolous action to get your pulse running, although that did work according to what Colby said a little bit ago. And just the entire sequence of this shadow trooper sneaking into this base. By the way, his starship, what an amazing design. It was like some kind of crazy triangle, such a unique shape, very sleek and very much smaller than a Star Destroyer. But wow, oh wow, is that a spectacular thing? I can't wait for the Lego of that. But it's just really well played out. And then when Crosshair shows up and Hauser and Crosshair get really mad at each other, that clone that's been interrogated, I won't say he lights up, but boy, oh boy, is he seething with rage and almost this weird joy that he's like, oh, good to see you, brother. Or he doesn't say good to see you, but he does very much antagonize him and basically say, why are you trusting this guy? And it's a terrific scene that is very much full of tension.
I agree, and I think that the earlier part with that clone was as chilling as that second part, but it got even more chilling as it went on when Crosshair showed up. What I loved about the first part with that interrogation was that he just refused to speak. He just wouldn't budge. So that shows a very tough mental challenge there that these clones are going to have to break through. The second part, when he starts to just sort of like antagonize Crosshair, the dialogue in this season just to me is another level, and this is another example of that. It's when that clone is talking about like, oh well, he went through it, right? He was going to be one of these, and then they asked him about it, and he goes, "Being defective is in my nature."
Yes,
he wouldn't have any. He admitted to it. He goes, "Yeah, I went through that, but being defective is my nature. I'm not." Going. Those guys reminded me of like something from a Bourne movie, like the Bourne Identity.
Yes,
this is like the treadstone of Star Wars, and I'm for it because these guys are compelling.
When he is chained up, he says, "If you want to answer somebody, why aren't you asking him, right, brother?" And Crosshair gets this really intense sense. Really, we've got to leave. They're coming for him right now. Yep. Did you notice, by the way, when they take that capsule out from his teeth so that he can't basically commit suicide, Star Wars style, like they do in The Mandalorian with that capsule? When that clone wakes up, the first thing he does is makes that sort of a face where you can tell he's trying to do it right away. So had he done that, he wouldn't have been able to talk Crosshair, which I thought was really, really interesting. This is also the first time we actually learn, or the clones learn, this is a program where they erase your identity. You've been basically repurposed to just be an assassin. And they tried to get Crosshair to do it, or to be a part of this little thing, just like you mentioned, Colby. But it didn't take because he's defective. And one of the things that's nice and understated, and we'll wrap up here on this episode, one thing that's really nice about all of that is they're saying defective, but they really mean is different or special or enhanced. It's sort of like a different way to do the X-Men thing, where the X-Men are different and there's a lot of discrimination against them because they are mutants. But in this instance, they're not saying the Bad Batch are mutants, they're saying they're defective. But we can see, and I'm sure the clones around them can see, they're not defective. They're actually quite a bit of cut above in their moral integrity and in how they fight and what they're fighting for. And I just think that's, again, I'm a broken record too, but I think that just makes this show so compelling. If you told me I'm going to get 3 seasons of a show only about clones, I'd probably be like, oh, cool. But now I'm like, I want 3 more because it's that good. It's that good. All right. Well, is there anything that we didn't talk about in Infiltration that either of you would like to bring up before we move on to the next episode?
Mason?
Nope.
Right.
Nope.
Commander Wolf. Well, it's the only thing I had to say.
Yeah,
because he's Commander the last Wolf. Thing you see, right?
Right. That was a great little cliffhanger. There's that turn, and you see the helmet with the gray wolf on there. And fortunately, Colby, how happy were you that this was not something we had to wait a week to see what was going to happen?
That's one of the points I have written down. So happy. So happy. Because this would have, oh man, I love, I guess I'm like you. I like being tortured. Give me that week to week. Make us wait because we love that anticipation. But I am so glad because I feel like these 2 episodes they're just perfect being a part 1 and part 2, even though they're not called part 1 and part 2. It leads you right to this perfect, mountaintop, and then the next one leads you right down that mountaintop, and it's just such a nice, perfectly designed and tight story, both of them together. I'm so happy that they did a double drop this week. It's just, I did want to mention one last thing about the music specifically. When those shadow soldiers are on the screen, I had such Stranger Things vibes because they got that synth going, and the Kiners really know how to use the synthesizer, and it's so subtle, but so good.
It reminded me of like a creepy 80s, almost like Blade Runner. The music, like it's very, because the whole sequence, the whole episode is really dark and moody and atmospheric, and the synth kind of ups the creep factor, like in 80s horror films too.
Oh, good call. Good call. Mason's thinking like, what's the 80s? What are you talking about? What is this?
That was a long time ago in a generation far, far away. Mason, please share your letter grade with this, and any last minute thoughts on the episode.
My grade, honestly, the first time we went through this, I honestly didn't think it was going to be this high, but I'm going to give it an A+.
Tell me why.
I just really like how like you can feel, oh no, he's coming. Oh no, how big is this fight going to be? What's going to happen? Oh no, is Crosshair going to be okay? And you just really feel that kind of feeling, and it's like a really good action. Well said,
Mace. Colby, what about you? Letter grade and final thoughts.
I'm famously easy grader, and this is easy for me too, because it's an A+. I couldn't, the 25 minutes or whatever it was it took to watch this went by so fast. And that's a sign of a good story, right? You're just enthralled in it. You're just enveloped in it. The pacing, even though I was lucky enough to watch it in the dark on a big screen, so it's not like I was watching this on a telephone or a telephone. What am I just late 40s-year-old Generation X, or a telephone, a rotary dial telephone. My phone. But yeah, it was dark, but I was okay with it because I was in a dark room. I got to see a lot. The pacing, the music, the story, just the tight construction of it, and the cliffhanger that we didn't have to wait to be resolved, A+.
Well, I think I'm sure it's happened before. It doesn't spring to mind, but this is the first time all of us are going to have the exact same grade. This is definitely an A+. You're not going to find a tighter constructive narrative that does all the things I said before. It advances the plot, advances the overall story, and is a very nice, very in-depth character piece that says a lot without words, but with characters' actions, expressions, and purpose. Purpose is so important. If you don't have good characters, you don't have a good story. But we care so much, and they care so much about each other, and boy, does that come through. Plus, the action, as you both mentioned, is terrific. It's very suspenseful, and Mason is totally right. Just that unnerving feeling of that shadow trooper showing up. And even though all these clones are just as capable as him, that shadow trooper is sinister and scary, and apparently appears to have no scruples of any kind. So it's something that is very concerning. Mason, someday I'm going to show you the second Terminator movie, and you're going to get a similar sense of that. And boy, oh boy, is that going to be fun. That's going to be fun. So yes, definite A+ all the way around. Now we're going to transition to Extraction. This is a shorter episode, but it is easily part 2 of this thing. This is the 7th episode in season 3 of the Bad Batch Extraction. Colby, let's start with you. One word to describe the episode and overall thoughts.
So this word is actually inspired by our genius friend Tom Gross, because of something that he said on the episode where you guys got to talk to him about the Bad Batch. And he made a comment about the lighting in one of the scenes. And I'm not going to go all the way into it until we get to that part, because I know we're going to talk about the end of this episode. But I'm going to make my one word bridge. And the reason I chose that word is because this show from the beginning has bridged eras. Now it's continuing to bridge further into other eras and things that happen in this episode. And there's also some physical, visual things that happen at the end of this, which I just sort of saw as a bridge. So
Yes.
I'm going with bridge. Again, very well paced. The action was this was a little bit more action heavy, right, than that first episode, and the action was so satisfying. And anytime there's water in the Bad Batch, I absolutely lose my mind. I don't know why. I just love the way that they make water look, and there's water in this episode. So, and then the end, the payoff is just. You mentioned it, Dan. You didn't know that you wanted a show about clones, but now you want more shows about clones, and I'm right there with you too. Give me an entire series about what Rex is doing, and include everybody.
Yes.
I'm there for it. I am there because of this episode that it made me feel that way. It was so good.
Amen to that. Mason, letter grade and overall thoughts.
My one word is tracker, because it kind of gives you a lot of like the vibes you had last episode, also the one you watched right before this probably. And this time it's not as much as sneaky, but like they're tracking them, trying to find the footsteps in the woods, and that's how I came up with that word.
It's great, and thank you for knowing how to speak dad, because I meant to say word, not letter grade. So thank you for not pulling back the curtain too much on that. My word for this is satisfying. This is a very satisfying episode for me. I feel like Crosshair gets his closure. Again, much earlier, and I'm glad that they're not extrapolating this thing and making it all about Crosshair's moods, because that's an important part of this, but it's not the whole essence of the entire piece that is the Bad Batch. He gets a beautiful closure with Hauser. He is able to give himself some peace of mind. He shows tremendous amounts of love and courage that are of the highest level, and he does it without apology. It's a terrific, yet another terrific character piece, but this one is much more understated. And the other one wasn't over the top or anything, but this one is clearly much more understated. As you said earlier, the beginning of this it's a very long, drawn out action sequence. And the more time the camera spends on this clone assassin, the more creepy he gets. And this is very much shown, I think, when this trooper is talking with Wolf. Now, Wolf interested me in this episode for reasons I didn't expect. Mason, talk to us about Commander Wolf and sort of what goes on with him in this.
Yeah, Commander Wolf, honestly, what I think is he didn't know what the Empire was doing. I think because of like how Order 66 and stuff, I think that he really just thought, oh, this is the good side. And then once he sees Rex, he's like, wait, I'm on the wrong side. What are they actually doing that I don't know about?
And I totally agree with you. And were there certain things that happened that made you feel that way? Or just kind of a sense? Like, just when he first met him, he was like, Rex? And like, just did not expect to see him. Right. Colby, what about you? What role does Wolf play in this episode for you?
You know, I feel like they set the tone right off the bat when he's getting off that ship and he sees that one clone that's sort of draped over the rock, and he had been killed earlier in an explosion. Mm-hmm. And one of the other clones says, wait, these are clones. And yes, he just sort of paused and looked. And I think maybe it was him that said, wait, these are clones. These aren't insurgents. And then I think that's when the other assassin clone came out and said they're both, right? He made a point of saying, hey, they're both. But right off the bat, I felt like Wolf, he makes a point to say this throughout the episode. They're not there to kill anybody. They're not there to blow things up and destroy. They're there to recover a target. And when he sees that they're clones, that changes his perspective, right? Even though he feels, Mason, like you so astutely pointed out, he feels like he's on the right side. But then he sort of, oh, wait a minute. These are guys what are these guys up to? And why do they have something that we want? And they're my brothers. So right off the bat, you feel like this very subtle conflict. And I thought it was very well handled.
I agree. To me, what Wolf's role here is to show, again, that there is a lot of gray, and how beautiful that his helmet is gray, right? He's looking at the world where he's not looking at things through black and white. He's allowing for other possibilities. Now, as Rex says at the end of the episode, I know you've been taught to follow orders. We all have. Something like, I'm paraphrasing. But he says, well, look around. They're hunting a child. Is that really what you want to be a part of? When he's trying to convince him the Empire is bad. Wolf doesn't know any better because Wolf has been presented the information. And it seems likely, based on what we see of Wolf in this episode, that he hasn't been around a situation where the Empire has been quite nefarious in the way they treat people that are innocent. For all we know, he's only been around combat, and you show up on a planet and someone's firing at you and you fire back, right? And someone tells you, oh, they're the bad guys, and you trust them because for Wolf, it was that, hey, the Empire is good. We know that's not true, but Wolf doesn't. And I think you can see the tension when he talks with this assassin, because he says, I'm the one in charge here. Is that clear? And the assassin doesn't respond. He just kind of looks. And he's always wearing that mask or that helmet, and he does not respond. And then all the action ensues. There's a great sequence where Crosshair is being very specific about telling Omega how to protect herself and how to stay hidden. And she says, "You're worse than Hunter." And he goes, "No, I'm much worse." But when he said, good. I have goosebumps. That is so good. Mason, what do you love about that part?
I just love that part. And he's like, just get ready. I'm so much worse than that.
It's so like authoritative. Like, no, I'm the dad. Oh, you're picking on my kid? Get out of the way, because I'm an unholy terror, and I'm not afraid to demonstrate that. It's so like, I don't know. It's so like, it's sort of like stereotypically masculine, but it's also so triumphant because now that Crosshair, we're fully on the Crosshair train, and we're in our Crosshair era. Thank you, Taylor Swift, Crosshair's version. Isn't it cool that we get to see him? There's this promise of seeing him unleashed and caring for, like talk about a mama bear, right? And it's such a great line. It's one of my favorite one of my favorite lines in all of the Bad Batch, all 3 seasons. That
you just brought something up, Dan, that I hadn't thought about, and I'm absolutely loving the idea. When you're looking at the father figure, we always think of Hunter because he's been sort of the protector from early on. Mm-hmm. Hunter is very reserved. He's very disciplined. He's stoic in a stoic in a certain sense. So you feel like, look, they took Omega from him, and what did he do? He crossed the galaxy 5 times looking for her, and that's exactly what Hunter would do. But Crosshair, you get the feeling, you called him a mama bear. He has that. He has that idea of, like, to borrow a line from the Joker, he's one bad day away, right? Where if something happened to Omega, you almost feel like you're going to see wrath unleashed rather than Hunter trying for months trying to find her. He's going to go ballistic. He has sort of that feel to him. And, that's such an interesting idea to me.
It is. I love it. I love it. I want to see more of that, and I'm sure we probably will. The main thing, because there's a lot less that goes on in this episode, it's very action heavy, but very suspenseful, like Mason, like you talked about in the first episode, which is great. The interesting thing here, though, is it ultimately comes down to a one-on-one confrontation between this clone and between Crosshair. I've got a lot of thoughts about this. I don't want to take what anybody else was thinking about saying, so I'm going to throw it to you first, Colby. Talk about this entire confrontation with this clone assassin and with Crosshair and all the little nuance that we get to see throughout this sequence.
Well, if I could just preface this with what I felt was a very effective action sequence when they're going down that staircase in the middle of that spire. I'm all for staircase fights, and I just felt it was constructed very well because you have the assassin coming in from the top, and then you have Wolf and his guys coming in from the bottom, and they're about to get squeezed. and the efficiency of these warriors just comes out, and Crosshair is the one. And this is really where the confrontation begins, right, Dan, that you're talking about. Crosshair goes to take care of that assassin droid. He can't hit him, and they make a point of seeing the shaky hand again, right? But then he adapts, because it goes back to sort of what he was telling Omega about. It's not about having good vision. You have to know when you have eyes on you. You have to be able to adapt to your circumstances. And he does. So he's like, okay, I'm not gonna be able to hit this guy, but I have this other sort of like a shotgun thing that I can put on my blaster, and he shoots it at the wall, and then boom, it blasts him. So he doesn't hit him, but he neutralizes him and forces him to go off into this other little tunnel, buys some time. And then it sort of to fast forward to the action in the jungle. I just have to say that, like, for a moment, I was scared that we were going to lose Crosshair. And it's because of a result of him being separated and having to take this assassin on one-on-one. I love the heat vision scope where he's able to scope him out and sort of, flush him out behind the rocks. And then they get into the water, and how often do we see fist fights in Star Wars? I don't recall very many. And this is a heck of a fight. Heck of a fight. And they're going toe to toe. Crosshair's getting it handed to him. And that's when I was worried. I'm like, wait a minute, we just got him back. Are we going to lose him? Or are they going to be forced to leave him? And these are all going through my brain so quickly because the episode is moving so quickly. I'm thinking to myself, no way. There's no way that they're going to leave Crosshair, because that would just be terrible. That he has separation issues anyway, and loyalty, right? So loyalty is a big theme in this episode. And it ends up resolving itself best way possible, right? And I thought it was quite poetic almost to have Hauser be the one that saves him.
Yes.
So yeah, just great.
Mason, I know you and I talked a lot about this sequence when it was happening. You had even mentioned something to me about in that staircase thing when Crosshair misses. Remember what you said about that?
No, I don't.
Right. Well, you said, well, this was like season 1 or 2. Crosshair would not have missed.
Oh yes, I did.
Yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, but talk to us about the whole fight sequence. Were you worried about Crosshair surviving as well?
I was, as soon as I saw the guy on the thermal scope through his, like, basically crosshairs, I thought, oh no, is he going to shoot Crosshair? And then when he was drowning Crosshair and Crosshair put his hand up, I thought he was going to die there too.
I know. And what do you think about how he escapes and just the action in that whole adventure scene?
Yeah, I just think it was the perfect, like, action movie, basically.
I agree. Now it's okay. Here we go. I've thought a lot about this. This is a really rich sequence. For one thing, you mentioned the water at the top, and I tried not to scream with joy when you mentioned water because I was going to save it. But water, get ready for full-on English teacher mode. Water is a beautiful symbol of change, of transformation, of rebirth. Crosshair has already gone through his transformation. Externally, that's what we've seen. And that's what we've been led to believe is what's going on. This is some choppy water. It's got a couple of drops, right? Change isn't always easy. Sometimes it's very violent. Sometimes we resist. Sometimes the change happens even when we don't want it to. There's a current here, right? Was it inevitable that Crosshair was going to change? It's very possible. This entire thing, besides being great and compelling and me worrying that Crosshair might not survive, I don't think Crosshair is getting beaten up so badly because he's an inferior combatant. I think Crosshair is far superior to this guy. But Crosshair is different. Hauser says, you've changed. We haven't even talked about that sequence. And then jungle, he says, you've changed. And Crosshair says something to the effect of, I lost someone. And I learned I was expendable. That's hard to, when you feel that, you can't just turn that off unless you're so incredibly zen. And there's a lot of trauma that has happened to Crosshair, to all of them, but especially Crosshair. So when he's fighting this assassin, I think it's a metaphor for him fighting himself and all of the trouble he had to change. he went through a lot of struggles to change. Now, I want to be clear on this. He's already changed. He's already the good person. But this is like reliving your trauma because people keep throwing it in his face. So while he's fighting this thing, I think it's a beautiful metaphor that symbolizes how hard it was for him to change to be the Crosshair that we now know and love in season 3. He almost died. He almost died to himself. He almost lost himself. And to see it fully fleshed out in this action sequence where he's fighting an actual clone that's like a darker version of who Crosshair could have been, because he could have been a part of this program too. And he didn't. But it was not easy. The fight is internal as well as external. And what a beautiful extended metaphor it is.
Mason, your dad's sort of smart. Did you know that?
What? No.
I love it. I love the visual storytelling behind this. And one of the things that it's so well displayed and so well expressed by yourself there, Dan. One of the things that I've sort of taken to calling this show is sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thought that I had with the word sophisticated was the animation. I feel like the animation has become so sophisticated, but really it's also applicable to that visual storytelling and the metaphor that we see perfectly displayed on in this fight sequence. And I have to tell you, the thing I got most worried about was when he was literally drowning him.
Yep.
Right. And when you see something like, and then he basically, his body relaxed, his body went limp. And that's when I got really concerned. But you don't get the kind of metaphor that you're talking about without that, because, full submersion and then he's up and
baptism, baby.
Yeah. It's just stellar.
And think about this, like when he's underwater, like he's given up. I think Crosshair has given up. I think he's struggling, and if he tried with the last desperation to get out, probably could. He's got plenty of training, but I think that it's how heavy is the burden that he has, and how cool that it's Hauser that saves him, because it's an example of an impartial clone. Well, he's not really impartial because he blames Crosshair for what happened to his brothers, but this isn't somebody from the Bad Batch. This is someone who represents clones in general, and they help to save him. Really beautiful.
I just look at it as like a what if situation. Is there another character that was in that vicinity that you would have been more satisfied to have saved Crosshair? My answer is no. If you had Wrecker or Hunter, that would have been cool. If it was Rex, Rex is Superman. I love that guy. Of course he's going to save, right? But that's Rex being Rex. But Hauser, from and that's the payoff I referred to earlier, where Hauser and Crosshair started and where they ended was just this perfect arc within a 45-minute span of each other. And their conversation, I feel like, is what sealed the deal for Hauser. And you referenced it when they had that talk going through the jungle. The word that Crosshair used was disposable. And that's, to me, so powerful, because, what do you think of when you think of disposable? Like something that you care nothing about that can be just discarded. And that's how Crosshair felt he was being perceived by the Empire. And that's very powerful and so well written and so well displayed. So for Hauser to hear that, he actually says, when he says that, disposable, he says, "You're not the only one," because that was the same realization he made back in that episode, standing with that standoff with Crosshair, and then he ends up, he's got his brothers there with him. He made that same connection. Just a wonderful character moment.
It's a stunner. It's an absolute stunner. And then at the end, Wolf has a chance to arrest them, turn them in, maybe worse. He lets them go. Because, again, he's looking at the world through gray. Is he completely at peace with the decision? No. But he makes it. He makes that choice, right? Your words are one thing, but it's what we do and how we do things, why we do things. That's what really matters. And to answer your question before, it has to be Hauser. If it was anybody else, it would have been a cheat. And I'm glad that they made the choice that they did. All right, let's wrap this up. Colby, give your letter grade for this and any last minute reflections on the episode.
So as I was watching this, I was thinking, I don't feel that it was quite as powerful or as effective as that episode 6 until it got to the end when we saw Rex. And there's something about seeing Rex at the head of the Bad Batch, essentially with Omega, and you can add Hauser in there, standing off with Wolf and these two. And when Echo arrives, the two ships facing each other, they're bathed in light. Rex is fully immersed in light, and Hauser is in the shadows. And I think that's another sophisticated visual storytelling point. And that's one of the reasons why I called it Bridge. And it's also the reason why I'm going to give this episode an A+, because of this scene. I mentioned Tom. Tom brought up when Omega was reunited with Wrecker and with Hunter. And when Crosshair came out, there was a scene that he mentioned, the lighting, where you have Crosshair in the light of his ship, and then you've got the other three in the lighting of their ship. But then the light stops, and there's this darkness between the two parties. In this one, they show the same frame with these two ships and these two groups of people.
Yep.
And the light is completely, fully connecting all of them. And just Rex being fully in the light, Wolf being still in the darkness, but that light is available to him, connecting these two ships, I just think is absolute perfection. And that's what really, for me, took that scene for me was, I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. So I said, okay, where this was an entertaining and fun and good episode, this took it to an A+ for me. So what a way to finish. I'm so happy I was able to come on and talk about it.
Yeah, I was happy to. I appreciate your thoughts and reflections, especially on that last thing. Mason, what about you? Your letter grade on this? I'm really, because you and I didn't talk about this. I don't know what your letter grade is going to be for this one, or even what you think about this episode. So what is your letter grade and last minute thoughts on it?
Yeah, I completely agree with Colby. I'm going to give this one an A+, just because that last scene takes it so farther in how much brotherly love you can see from the clones.
Well, when I started talking about Extraction, I was pretty at peace with an A-. It might maybe even a B+. And then we started talking some more. And then this whole metaphor thing hit me. And I thought, well, this is an absolute stone cold A+. How could it be anything but an A+? And it's because of the last 6 minutes. You don't get that kind of character stuff and not get an A+. I mean, that's stellar. It's so impactful. Again, it's not a fight. I remember Freddie Prinze Jr. saying to me years ago when he first came on Coffee with Kenobi, he said, watch the ending of these movies, and if they don't have dialogue and they're all CGI heavy, is it really, what kind of story is it telling you? This didn't rely on the action. The action was important, but it was more about the whys. The whys. Why are these characters doing this? Why does Crosshair react in the way that he does? What is the internal struggle that he has? The man versus self conflict has always been the most fascinating to me, and it is beautifully done, laid out. And the animation, you mentioned the water, is gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. So they're both episodes from all three of us are A+.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
Colby, the Colby Cast continually gives us A+. Please tell us what's going on with the Colby Cast and let us know. I'll let everyone know where they can find your show and you on social media.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's always a thrill to come on the show and talk to you, Dan. And it's an even bigger bonus when I get to hang out with Mason too. So Mason, it was great to see you again. It has been a while. I looked it up. It's like over a year that we recorded about the Bad Batch season 2. It was early in that season. And I just love hearing your thoughts every week. Mason, you do a great job, so keep it up. The Colby Cast, I get to hang out with my two sons, Caleb and Luke. They're in their 20s. They drive me crazy. They keep me on my toes. I never know what's going to come out of their mouth. I had some enjoyable moments last when I got to listen to Kerwin and Keith and yourselves last episode, because what the boys were saying, I was like, I can so relate to this. So relate to it. But yeah, we talk about it all because I just have a very short attention span. So if we have a Star Wars show going, we talk about it. If it's a Marvel show or a movie, we talk about it. We just did a last Avatar: The Last Airbender live action recap show. So I just love having the chance to sit there and talk to my boys about fun stuff, and we put it all out there for everyone to enjoy. So you can find us on all the socials at the Colby Cast. Just Google it. You'll see on X, Threads, and Instagram, all of those, and all the podcatchers too. So we put out an episode every week, and we hope everybody enjoys it. And again, it all started here, Dan, and I really appreciate you having me back.
Hey, you have there's not even a door or revolving door. It's just an open field for you to run in and share your passions and your kind heart with us anytime. We always love to talk to you, my friend.
Right back at you.
And Mason, are you still, if people want to find you, are you still on a basketball court sinking threes?
Yes.
All right. Fantastic.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.